Shana Tova and Shabbat Shalom. It's nice on a day like this, you can't get it wrong. We're so used to saying Shabbat Shalom, sometimes we do that when the holidays fall on different days. Oh, it's just wonderful to see you all. One night earlier this month, I was sitting up late by the glow of a small work light, thinking about Rosh Hashanah, reading a number of essays, pouring through some books, and I heard a song. Eleanor Rigby picks up the rice in the church where a wedding has been, lives in a dream. Father Mackenzie writing the words of a sermon that no one will hear. No one comes near. Oh, the image of the lonely cleric writing the words to a sermon. Bless you all, I don't have to say no one will hear. Thank you so much for being here. But oh, does my heart go out to the lonely clerics and to all of the lonely people. As the Beatles asked rhetorically, where do they all come from? Loneliness has been on my mind a lot lately, especially since this last April, when the United States Surgeon General, Dr. Vivek Murthy, produced a landmark 81-page study declaring loneliness an absolute epidemic of epic proportions. As reported by Nicholas Kristof in an ongoing series called How America Heals, he takes from Dr. Murthy's extensive report the takeaway that loneliness crushes the soul, but researchers are now finding it does far more damage than that, if that's possible. Loneliness is linked to strokes, heart disease, dementia, inflammation of joints, and suicide. It breaks the heart literally as well as figuratively. According to the findings of this extensive research, loneliness is as deadly as smoking 15 cigarettes a day and more lethal than consuming 6 alcoholic drinks a day. Dr. Murthy concluded that loneliness is more dangerous for public health than obesity. And alas, we have been growing more lonely. A majority of Americans now report experiencing loneliness based on a widely used scale that asks questions such as whether people lack companionship or feel left out. There are solutions, approaches that build connection and bind us together, and Great Britain apparently is the pioneer of these efforts, having established 2 years before the pandemic, in 2018, the post of Minister for Loneliness. Now, I'm guessing that the more accurate title would be Minister that is concerned with preventing and alleviating loneliness, but for the sake of brevity, the post is called Minister for Loneliness. It may be less obvious than the need for a defense minister or a foreign minister, but other countries are paying attention. Maybe not surprisingly, Japan has appointed also a minister to alleviate loneliness, as has Sweden, and there are calls in Australia and other countries for such a post. If the researchers are correct, social isolation probably kills more people in the West each year than committed terrorists and murderers, and it costs the public enormous sums in unnecessary health costs. Countermeasures can make a huge difference. One review concluded that social connectedness increases the odds of an individual surviving roughly the next 7 years by about 50%. The Great Depression was economically devastating, and yet records are that mortality during the Depression didn't rise, but actually fell. Why didn't we have more deaths of despair in the Great Depression? Likely because in the 1930s, community institutions were strong. Churches, men's clubs, women's associations, bridge clubs, bowling leagues, extended families. These community institutions buffered the pain and humiliation of unemployment and economic distress. And in some cases, these groups actually stepped up and became more active during times of distress. But you all know as well as I do that those community institutions have frayed. And now we feel like we're on our own. And maybe that's why so many die alone as well. Stuart Andrew, the British Minister for Loneliness, has said, of course, that one of the challenges of loneliness is the stigma that surrounds it. We're embarrassed that we're lonely and slow to seek help. And in this country especially, the image of the rugged individualist riding the range on a horse with no name is powerful and enduring. We're supposed to be able to pull ourselves up by our bootstraps alone. Wonderful if it works, but over a societal scale, and certainly anecdotally by the tens of millions, it doesn't. Paul Dolan is a professor of behavioral sciences at the London School of Economics, where my dad went. And he says rather simply, we're not meant to be lonely as a species. Now, we know that. Loneliness has been a feature of the human condition since the dawn of creation, which we'll read in a couple of weeks. In Genesis, we learn that after creating everything and calling everything good, God looked at Adam, alone and without a companion, and labeled loneliness as the original human problem. Genesis 2, verse 18, God says, "It is not good for humanity to be alone." From those first moments, humans have struggled with this perennial problem. For some, loneliness is situational. We move to a new place, leave a relationship, face job loss or death, and feel alienation and isolation. For others, loneliness is more chronic, a perpetual sense of absence of companionship, a constant state of feeling unseen and unknown. Rabbi Mark Katz has written very sensitively about the issue of loneliness, especially in the Jewish world. He asks, what causes loneliness? It's not necessarily an absence of people, since some of us can feel whole in solitude. Rabbi Nachman of Breslov, the 18th century Hasidic master, used to escape voluntarily into the forest to commune with the divine in a process he called hitbodedut, and he felt totally content. Many of us know that feeling. And conversely, the presence of others is not always the answer, since so many of us can feel lonely in the most crowded of places. In fact, I imagine that some of you know the feeling that the more people there are in a situation, the more lonely we feel. Rabbi Katz wrote something that I found especially profound. In an attempt to define loneliness, he says this, and I'm going to repeat it a couple of times. He suggests that loneliness lives in the space between the person you know yourself to be and finding people in your life who will see you that way. Say it again. It took me a few readings to incorporate it. Loneliness lives in the space between the person you know yourself to be and the quest to find people in your life who can see you that way. For anyone who has been in a relationship or a job situation or a community where you feel that the person you are, that you know yourself to be in your holy of holies, is not being seen and received and accepted by the people that surround you, that's lonely. It strikes me that there are individuals in our Torah reading today that call out to us from a place of loneliness. There are endless ways, thank God, to interpret the Torah readings, all of them, from Genesis to Deuteronomy. But we read this section in conservative and Orthodox communities from Genesis every year at Rosh Hashanah, and every year there's something new to hear in it. This year I heard, like a gong, the loneliness of Mother Sarah. She strikes me as such a solitary figure in so many ways. And she isn't really seen. God remembers her, thankfully, but her actions subsequently speak of loneliness. She's celebrating, she's in a room full of people, and she can't fully rejoice. And there are interpretations of the story of Sarah and Hagar that picture them as once having been the best of friends. And then Sarah sends her away, and later, of course, is bereft of her beloved Isaac. We don't know that much about the relationship between Abraham and Sarah, but so many of her actions suggest that she was feeling an emptiness inside. And then, of course, at some points in her story, the loneliest figure of all is Hannah, who goes alone to the sanctuary. She's not with a minion or a sisterhood or even a friend. She is alone, pouring out her heart to God. But when she explains who she is and why she is so forlorn, the priest, Eli, to his credit, sees her for the person that she knew herself to be. It's Rabbi Katz's definition of loneliness to a T. Eli sees her, and the prophets tell us she was gladdened, and she went home and she ate, which she was having trouble doing before. These lonely figures and the remedies applied to them are a blueprint for us, for how to reach out to those who may be in need and to ask for help when we need it, and know that it may not come right away. Not everyone in our lives is capable of seeing us for who we actually are. Aren't the Jewish people a lonely folk? In our Aleinu prayer, which was written for the High Holy Days, we say we are a people that has a destiny unlike any other. And Dr. Louis Warschauer suggests that the separation of the Jewish people from other peoples is too often experienced as a lonely and uncomfortable posture, rather than a noble solitude. Whether we're uncomfortable or feeling noble, it can really be lonely at times to be a Jew, which is why our communal gatherings and our institutions, however they may look going forward, are so urgent and crucial to support and sustain. There are many ways that communities alleviate loneliness. In Great Britain, the Minister for Loneliness has overseen things like the Big Help Out, the Great Get Together. There are glamour clubs where people are encouraged to wear their best outfits and everyone must compliment one another. There are chatty benches where you can sit if you're happy to chat with passersby. Talking cafes, where the people, not the cafes, are encouraged to gab with other coffee drinkers. There are libraries of things where you can mingle with neighbors, to borrow camping equipment or a carpet cleaner or lend out your own gear. One of the paradoxes of humanity is that while we have evolved, wealth has driven us towards solitude. When we have the resources, we stopped sleeping 8 to a hut and built big houses with high walls. Each family member has a private bedroom or bathroom, and then to afford the mortgage, we work so hard that we can never have meals together. Of course, a generation ago, some thought that Facebook and other social media would bind us together, and they do in many ways. But many experts, of course, think these platforms have instead made us much more lonely. People look at social media feeds and conclude that everyone else is having more fun and is doing better than they are. A wonderful t-shirt or bumper sticker I saw a while back said, "May your life be half as wonderful as it appears to be on Facebook." And of course, time with screens substitutes too much for time with human beings. So much of this is probably feeding, as you all know, into the crisis in mental health, young people over the last dozen years. In fact, we usually imagine that older people are the loneliest, but polls find that young adults are twice as likely as seniors to report feeling alone. I'm a dog lover, and dog lovers, we all think of pets as providing a natural solution to loneliness, but the evidence of that actually isn't clear. And now, of course, we're talking very seriously about robots and artificial intelligence to engage us and lure us out of our social isolation. But let's get real. I mean, really real. There is everything to still be said for friends who are actually living, breathing human beings. What kinds of solutions might we bring to this epidemic of loneliness? Well, so many of you are doing exactly as the prescribers have suggested, relying on history and figures who were lonely, and then, to the extent that we can paint their stories, were redeemed. Isaac, who found love and companionship with Rebekah after the death of his mother. We reach out, we hear in the Talmud that says a captive cannot release himself from prison. So we know that we are supposed to reach across whatever aisle or next door that we can and help another person, even if it means taking a risk. Take it this year. Let it be part of your new fruit. Try something new, a new relationship, a new friendship, something new to help stitch together a little bit of the frayed fabric of our society. Develop a relationship with the divine, however you imagine that to be. No Jewish person or person connected with any part of this tradition should ever feel fully alone, even if you don't pray to a personal God. Prayer can be a powerful tool to help cope with loneliness. Prayer is as much about ourselves as it is about God. If we pray with enough heart, we can be changed by the process. We have to continue building a scaffolding around loneliness to hold us up when people fail us, nurturing a sense of purpose by engaging with people, feeding the hungry, taking care of the natural world, spreading a little bit of wisdom. The philosopher Friedrich Nietzsche once said, "He who has a why to live for can bear almost any how." When we feel alone, the mission to do good in the world can carry us through, and we might just meet some wonderful people along the way. As much as those tools matter, maybe Rabbi Nachman had it right. Maybe the greatest tool to combat loneliness is to learn to be alone sometimes. Many of us don't want to be without others, maybe because we don't feel comfy enough to be by ourselves. It's a place to start, and it's the foundation from which all other relationships come. Because when we learn to judge ourselves less and love ourselves more, that means that when we do find ourselves alone, we will be happy with our companion. Rabbi Joshua ben Levi famously said that each of us has a choir of angels that process before us, proclaiming, "Make way for the image of God." Imagine if we could live like that, if we could believe it. We know where the lonely people come from. And though the Beatles ended their iconic song with an unanswered question, we can say, "We see you, and we're coming." Shana Tova.